She kept in touch with my father, and I found some of her letters the other day at New York University. She went to Paris and Cuba and wrote them letters. You know, one of the problems in those days was if you didn't have an address, and you know, people were moving around, you didn't actually know where somebody was, because without a permanent address, you can have to send a letter. Anyway, somehow they've been in touch, and so I have her letters from 1936, 37, 38. She continued to live here in New Mexico. She bought a printing press in 1948 and started doing a significant amount of work, doing books like Hamlet, again, all on her hand press material. And it was really very gorgeous and subtle and individualistic. Sadly enough, her studio here was vandalized in 1953, but so she recovered. She was very sad for it. And there is, I don't know how many of you know about the Dorothy Stewart Trail, which was established here in 1989. It's a little bit out there near St. John College or University College. Let me see. So here's Marie Chalot, who was a companion for many years. Just some other major elements in her work. She did the major fresco work in the Lulu Theater in Albuquerque in 1936. She got the printing press. She did Hamlet, Midsummer Night's Dream, and a couple of other books. And I visited all of those down at the Rare Book Collection at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And she died in Mexico in 1945. So I don't know how many trips she went back to Mexico, but clearly it was very much part of her life. So I want to just flip through some of the drawings. These are actually the prints that I have in my possession, which she had given to my father, and they were going to do a book about them. They're really just absolutely exquisite. Now, this image, I remember, well, was hanging on our wall in our home in Newport, County Mayo for all those years. And when I moved up to Dublin in 1954, again, of all of my father's art collection, he had this on his wall. I had no idea what it was. And, but when I saw it again, and we had this one on our wall. But with, she also captured the spirit of her environment here in New Mexico. I don't know the name of that dance, but if you've gone to any of the fiestas, you'll recognize some of them. The other thing that she did is she has a fantastic spirit of color in her paintings, and some of these paintings are absolutely thrilling. I find refreshing, impressionistic, and giving. Here's one of the elements of the book of Hamlet, a play made in Elsinore, Denmark. And here's the letter. Here's a letter I found on eBay. It was interesting the other day, and it was written by Dorothy to Sylvia, and it was about Laura Gilpin, who was a photographer who lived here. And just by way of interest, I'm sure the Gilpin photograph is part of the assumed element of price worthiness in here, but I think that was going on eBay for $3,300. So one of these research, and it was a 1955 note, so that would have been near the end of her life. So now the other part is my own father, Ernie OMalley, and I'm going to skip his sort of military background because we were really talking about his life in America. But he was an active in 1916, it was the year of the Irish Rebellion, and he went on to have a very senior position in the War of Independence and the Civil War between 1916 and 1924. He'd been captured, wounded, and in bad health by both the British and the Irish when he was against the Irish government when they signed a treaty with England, because he wouldn't accept the limitation of the 26 counties which was incorporated into the treaty. And as anyone who knows about recent Irish history, those 6 counties have been in dispute, should I say, with the IRA for the last 40 years. And then there was a peace agreement in 1998. Anyway, he was released in 1924 in bad health. 41-day hunger strike doesn't help your health any, not as many heavy wounds that he suffered. And so he went off to Paris, to France, and to Spain, and walked through the south of Europe and down to Spain, and became very conversant as a autodidactic in art. He would go into every church that he could, every art museum he could, and I have all of the catalogs of his peregrinations all over the way around there. And he changed his name, traveled on an English passport, which I found rather ironic. But it was a sacred thing to do because he didn't want to. He didn't want to be a member of the Irish Free State because that would recognize the Irish government. So he rather picked the enemy of the enemy rather than just his direct enemy. Anyway, he travels around Europe, comes over to the United States in 1928, roves around here for 8 years, and in the course of that, I found some of my research. I found a note that he'd written in Seattle in an interview with somebody, and he said, my life, sorry for my titles, my life lives with the arts, in them lies happiness. When I found that sentence about 15 years ago, I suddenly realized it was just, like hieroglyphics when you finally have that transcription code. That single sentence represents to me the whole transformation of my father's forget politics and go into art. And so what he did thereafter, and had done for some years before, because he had read art throughout his days on the run, and as well as his drawings, he was not a great artist, but he had a sensitivity to art, and he certainly was able to absorb it. He ran into friends like Edward Weston, that took this great photograph of him in Carmel in 1929, and he didn't stay long there, but part of their conversation in Mexico, in Carmel was about Mexico, and Weston had lived with Tina Modotti in the Italian photographer who was living in Mexico at the time, and recommended that Paula go there. We have the notes on all of that conversation. Oops, sorry. So one of the things he wanted to do was write the story of his sort of life in a certain sense. Part of that story eventually becomes published as On Another Man's Wound. And he's writing this book on the back of scribbles of paper and notebooks. And it's about the story of his War of Independence struggles. And he's writing that in California, in Taos, New Mexico, in Santa Fe. So literally, this book is partially written here. And even in Mexico, I have the correspondence of where chapters are sent down to Mexico, and he's correcting them and sending back to typists in New York. But he knew that there was an Irish artist and writer, Ella Young, who had spent the summer with Mabel Dodge Lujan in Taos. And so he was asked, a friend that he was staying with, Mrs. Goldman, Helen Goldman, in Pasadena, where can I find Ella? Ella was an Irish lady who had published her book, and a writer, had been to Republic, knew of my father, and had referenced him. So clearly she had all of the Republican credentials, which are important in terms of trust. How do you trust somebody? And so he got in a car, the Goldman's car, and used to borrowing people's cars, and their teenage son wanted to go to the Grand Canyon for the summer. Father offered to drive them, and when they were at the Grand Canyon, he said, Taos isn't too far. And so they drove on to Taos, and I have their diaries of that first dinner that they had with Mabel Dodge and Lujan, and of course Ella Young was there. And so it was sort of exciting when I read the diaries One of the things that Father has is, and I've left a book out there, which some gentlemen were very helpful to identify some of the locations in the photographs. There's 300 photographs of Albuquerque, of Santa Fe and New Mexico in the 1930s, and I have no idea where they are. But I thought this was a fascinating one because this was probably the main road from Albuquerque to Santa Fe. And a father who always disliked taking a photograph, and the Goldmans who always would say, "I want somebody in the photograph." So you can see he's turning his face away. But that's the roads, as you. Some of them are still in that condition in certain parts of New Mexico. But anyway. So the reason for coming to Taos was to meet Ella Young. And he really wanted to have her criticize his poetry and give him some suggestions as to how to write this book that he was writing. He wasn't a writer, he wasn't trained in writing. He had read well in modernist writing and was up on all of the current people, but he just didn't have anyone to chat about what should I do for writing. And when he got to Taos, the Golden family was so intrigued with Taos. Remember, 1929 was a difficult year economically. And so it was far cheaper in Taos than in Pasadena, where she was living. So she said to her companion of the time, "Why don't we move to Taos?" So in fact, they went back to Pasadena, packed up their household, and moved to Taos. In the meantime, Father stayed on. Something is going too quickly here. Stayed on in Taos, and occasionally spent time with Mabel Dodge Lohan and her husband, Tony Lohan. And of course, you know why there's an H and a J, because she being a lady from Buffalo, New York, wanted to make sure that her name was pronounced properly and put it as H, whereas Tony's name actually was M-U-J-A-N. Very distinct. The full photograph of that horse is just a magnificent portrait of Tony. And Father befriended Tony, and he was very helpful to introducing him to the Taos Pueblo and various other community pueblos around New Mexico, where he went and subsequently wrote about them in his diaries. Other people in Taos at the time that people would have met were Lewinshine and Faken and Spud Johnson. So again, he not having much money would house it. So when Spud Johnson went back to Carmel for the winter, he sat and read all of the books and house sat for him. When Dorothy Brett went to New York to write a book about D.H. Lawrence, she asked him to supervise the building of her little house, which could not be on the D.H. Lawrence ranch, but it was just a little way down. And so Father got a job supervising that. And he knew Dorothy Mann, who came to Taos and Paul Strand in 1931. So here's Father's, he had many sketches, and I noticed one of them being sold for $90. $90 is an incredible price in 1930 for a painting. It's certainly a nice painting, but I think he was thinking a lot of himself to try to get $90 for it. But some of the other ones were $25, and I can't say that the 90 was that much better than the 25, but I didn't have them all here. So in the one of the things he was doing throughout his time in New York, as well as he wandered around, was to write poems. And I thought I'd read one or two here, which is written in Taos in 1930, and it could be written about